prepare ourselves as you put your hand over your eyes. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today. And over your ears, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today. And over your heart, just extend your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today. The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that we are spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe, governed by spiritual laws, having a human experience. We are spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe, governed by spiritual laws, having a human experience. Now, sometimes when I hear people say that, when they get to the human experience part, they're almost apologetic, you know? Oh, I'm having a human experience. I'm sorry. Your human experience is so important to the improvement of your soul. So important. At CSA, we don't want you to transcend your human experience. We want you to merge your spiritual life and your human life together, because we believe, and we want you to recognize, that God wants to show up just as you are right now. Your looks are not an accident. They have God written all over them. Your personality is not an accident. It has God written all over it. Your likes and dislikes and preferences are not an accident. They have God written all over them. And they are important for the evolution of our soul. Now, what we do believe is this: God will change expressions, can change expressions. Sometimes we get to a point, we've been one way for a while, maybe we've been ultra shy, and we want to work on being less shy. Well, God will change expressions by right of your consciousness. God will change expressions. God will never change the source. God will never change the principle, but God will change expressions as you desire to change by right of your consciousness. And that's a great thing, because otherwise a lot of us would be walking around with bell bottoms, and some of us would be wearing afros, and we'd just be late to the party, see? So it's not that we can't change, but every step of our evolution humanly has God written all over it. It's a good thing in our life. God never changes principle. Within you are some things that will not change. The principle of serenity, the principle of joy, that's within you. Won't change. But the expression of those things can change. Well, see, we're gathered here today, and every Sunday we come. See, every Sunday we come, we're gathered for one thing, and that is to merge the human and the spiritual in our life. See, the human is finite. The spiritual is infinite in our life. The spiritual is a human being. The human is a human doing in our life. The spiritual is like the ocean, its vastness. The human is the drop of that ocean in our life. See, we are pure oneness with all beings by virtue of the fact that we are both human and spiritual. Both the authority expressed by God and the authenticity expressed by God is within us. God's not trying to squish, and we're not trying to squish. And when you become more spiritual, if you want to be spiritual, you know how some people say, I'm becoming quite spiritual? Okay, if you want to be that, what you need to know is that the human part of you is fabulous. It's fabulous. And, you know, there are people who want to cloister themselves. There are people who do cloister themselves. They live on ashrams. They live in cloistered convents and abbeys, because they don't want the outside to touch anything impure with their spiritual being. I'm all for that. If you want to do that, then if you want to, I support that. I support anybody going to live in an ashram or an abbey or a convent to keep themselves pure. It's not for me. It's not for me. And you know, it wasn't for the Buddha. Buddha eventually got up under the Bodhi tree, and he went out among the people, and he began to teach, and he began to preach, and he began to live among them. That's what we're trying to do, is to take ourselves out and live among people, because there is a life to be fulfilled. There are pleasures to be had, places to go, jokes to be told, acts of kindness to be shared, children to be born, problems to be solved, songs to sing, golf to play. There's all kinds of things out there that we want you to have and to do. See, sometimes some of us are still under the illusion of a God of our childhood. That God of our childhood who said certain pleasures are okay and other pleasures are not okay. We don't need the God of your childhood telling you that anymore. There are some people who grew up and went to churches and people dressed up in black just like I'm dressed up today and stand up on a pulpit and they tell you some of the things that you like to do were wrong or bad. We want you to lose that. You know inside of you, you have the presence of God within you to know what pleasures are life-enhancing pleasures and what pleasures are not life-enhancing pleasures. You don't need anybody external to tell you that because you already know it. You already have that information for yourself. See, we want to really get that God wants to express authentically through us. And that's a fabulous thing. God wants to try out things. And some of those things that we tried out, we said, ooh, that wasn't such a good thing for me. And other things that we tried out, we said, that was fabulous for me. You're the only person who can say that. Well, today is all about looking how we can merge the spiritual and the human. And so I want to share with you 4 notions that I want you to contemplate this week in order to help yourself merge more effectively the human and the spiritual. Now, there's nothing new I'm going to tell you here today. You've heard it all. Some of this stuff I say every single week. But it never hurts to have a little revisit of these things if we haven't completely merged. When you merge, by the way, we teach a class called Self-Mastery. If you ever see that class come up again, take that class. That's what it's all about. It's merging the spiritual and the human. That's the point of the class. That's really the point of our lives. So I want to look at these 4 little things. The first one is recognize that everything is God. Now, I say that a lot. Recognize that everything is God. It's not just the things that make you happy. It's not just the things that make you rich. It's not just the things that make you serene in your life. Everything that happens to us, God has a hand in. And you don't even need me to tell you that because you already know that. Every one of us in this room has experienced one tragedy in our life that we thought that's the devil right there. No matter what Reverend Georgia says. This tragedy was brought on by the devil. But if we give it enough time, if we give that enough time, we can look back, and in hindsight, we can see when the tears are dried, when the debt has been repaid, when the sting of having your house foreclosed upon is lessened, you can look back and you can see the hand of God in it. You can look back and see this experience has added value to my soul. Even when we've lost somebody that we love and we're angry about it, even if we ourselves get a diagnosis and we're angry about it, if we can look at it enough with this understanding that everything is God and God's hand is in everything, we can begin to understand it with new eyes, with spiritual eyes in our life. We can see that God has added value to our soul through this experience. It's not fun, but it's true. The second, and really, what we want to get to is to begin to train ourselves, and by train ourselves, I mean train ourselves. I mean really practice this so that when the tragedy happens at that moment, of course we have emotions. We want you to have emotions. We don't want you to stuff them down. We want you to have the emotions, and then we want you to look at that tragedy and ask yourself, where is God's hand in this? Where has value been added to my soul by this tragedy? And the sooner we can do it, the sooner we begin to merge the spiritual and the human in our life. So the first one is recognize God is in everything. The second one is we have to begin to look at our past with new perspective, with spiritual perspective in our life. Look at our past with spiritual perspective. It doesn't mean to close the door on it. It doesn't mean to bury it. It means to look at it dead in the eye. Ernest Holmes was always fond of saying, we look at something until we can see the face of God in it. And when we can see the face of God in it, then we can begin to have compassion in our life. So we have to ask ourselves this question. Because here's the truth. What happened in our past has a direct bearing on how we are today. What happened in our past has a direct bearing on how we react to life today. So we have to ask ourselves this two questions. One is, did that really happen in my past? Did it really happen? And if it did it happen for the reason I think it happened? For instance, there are children who are going around carrying into adulthood. Their parents got a divorce because of them. Or because their parents got a divorce, they were less than in the relationship department. But the truth is, your parents got a divorce because their soul was being called in a different direction. Either one or both were being called to move in a different direction. Sometimes we look at our parents and we say, God, they were so critical. I do that sometimes. My mother was so critical of me. But the truth is, most parents are critical of their children because they're afraid for them. And when they're afraid for them, they become critical. When we can begin to look at that with your past with spiritual eyes, put a new perspective on it, what happens in our life is that we begin to develop compassion. And when we begin to develop compassion, that is the start of oneness. That is the start of the merging in our life. The third one is we have to stop looking outside for answers. Now, I say this so often, but I'm going to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it until I get it, until I understand it. To not look outside for any more answers, because Spirit has installed in each one of us a link to a complete library with all of the information we need or want. It's inside of us now. I'm going to start a campaign in my life for myself and anybody who wants to join me. And that is to take the pledge to stop saying, I'm confused. I'm not confused. I'm deaf. See? I'm deaf. I'm not listening to what it is that Spirit is telling me. I'm going to stop praying for courage, for clarity, and I'm going to start praying for courage. Now, I think we all need to ask for clarity, but that's a short conversation. Clarity is a short conversation. And when we get it, we need to move our prayer into courage and start praying for courage in our life. Because here is what I believe. I believe we know when the relationship is over. We know it. We know when it's time to tell our boss something that's difficult for us to say. We know when it's time to give our teenagers tough love. We know all of that. But we're afraid of their reaction when we do it. See, our fear isn't for them, it's for us. We don't want to have to deal with that unpleasantness. I want to read you a story that I find very helpful when saying hard things to people. An old monk sat by the side of the road. With his eyes closed, his legs crossed, and his hands folded in his lap, he sat. In deep meditation, he sat. Suddenly, his zazen was interrupted by the harsh and demanding voice of a samurai warrior. "Old man, teach me about heaven and hell." At first, as though he had not heard, there was no perceptible response from the monk. But gradually he began to open his eyes, the faintest hint of a smile playing around the corners of his mouth as the samurai stood there waiting impatiently, growing more and more agitated with each passing second. "You wish to know the secrets of heaven and hell?" replied the monk at last. "You who are so unkempt, you whose hands and feet are covered with dirt, you whose hair is uncombed, whose breath is foul, whose sword is dirty and rusty and neglected, you who are ugly and whose mother dresses you funny, you would ask me of heaven and hell?" The samurai uttered a vile curse. He drew his sword and raised it high above his head. He turned to crimson, and the veins on his neck stood out in bold relief as he prepared to sever the monk's head from his shoulders. "That is hell," said the old monk gently, just as the sword began its descent. In that fraction of a second, the samurai was overcome with amazement, awe, compassion, and love for this gentle being who had dared to risk his very life to give him such a teaching. He stopped his sword in mid-flight, and his eyes filled with grateful tears. "And that," said the monk, "is heaven." See, we need not be afraid. We need not be afraid of saying as many truths as we can in our life, because God wants us to come out and play in the most authentic way we can, which leads me to the last wisdom I want to share with you, and that is the wisdom of be aware of what masks you are wearing. Every day when you get up in the morning, say, is there a mask I might put on today to hide my authenticity? Maybe you're a dad, and maybe you don't want to cry in front of your children because you don't think men should cry. Even though you're in pain, you don't want to cry in front of your children. When we do that, we're putting on a mask. Maybe you went to a doctor who said that you're going to have limited mobility, and you're putting on the mask of a disabled person. There is no doctor in the world who can define who you are in your life. Maybe you're a person who says, I live on a fixed income. That's a mask. That's a mask. You don't live on a fixed income. God is your source, and God is your supply. And it's open and running right now. Maybe you're somebody who judges. Maybe you have the mask of a judge that you put on. I know I did that with the elections last week. It was very frustrating for me to watch the television. In fact, Donna said, let's just turn it off, because I was in judgment mode. See, there's only one of us on the planet. Only one. And when we put on the mask of judgment, we're forgetting that we're merging our human self and our spiritual self together. Maybe you're putting on the mask of being stuck. That's a mask. Being stuck is a mask. We're forgetting that God is moving through us all of the time, breathing fresh air through us all the time, trying to get us to move out of our stuckness all of the time. I want to close this morning with a biblical teaching from the master teacher Jesus, and it's one I think we get mixed up. The teaching is this: if you bring forth that which is within you, then what you bring forth will save you. See, we mix that up a lot. We shorten it. We like to shorten things. And so what we say is, if you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. But that's not what the teaching is. The teaching is, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. See, all we have to bring forth within us is our authenticity. That's it. We don't really have anything else. Just who we are. And when we bring that forward authentically, it not only saves us, it saves the planet. Because we touch so many other human lives when we are authentically brought forth. And of course, Jesus went on to say, if you do not bring forth that which is within you, then that which you do not bring forth will destroy you. And a lot of us are walking on the planet in some state of destroyment. I don't know if that's a word, but now it is. Some state of depression, or some state of anxiety, or some state of low self-esteem, or some state of something that's keeping us down. You are the most powerful life changers on the planet. That which is within you, if you bring it forward and share it with one another, and especially with that one in the mirror, until you say, I am a human being having a human experience, and I feel great about that. Let's take this message into prayer, knowing that there's only one power. It's the power of love, really. It's that great power that runs through us deep, 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 waiting to be called upon, to come forward, to heal ourselves and the planet and the people sitting next to us and the people in our families, just by being a human being. I give thanks for that. I release this word into the law, and together we say, and so it is. If you will take your gift in your hand, and while you're doing that, let me just